Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, that was an interesting end to the Lions-Packers game, and I think the only people who were really surprised that it happened this way were the Lions fans. This seemed incredibly inevitable.
Right, yeah. So it's awful. Like, it's bad for football what happened. But, you know, in something like that, of course, it's the Lions, right? So, like, out of all of, like, the downtrodden franchises over the past, like, decade and a half, 2 decades, like the Browns, the Lions, the Bills.
Browns.
I feel the Browns. I feel like it's the Lions that most often get, like, kicked in the teeth specifically by officials, right? Like, you know, and maybe, you know, sometimes it's, like, their own mistakes, right? But, like throwing the flag on or throwing the challenge flag on a touchdown that was automatically reviewed and it got taken back, you know, like that kind of thing, or
Hail Marys,
Calvin Johnson.
Yep, Hail Marys that should have been knocked down that instead they tried to catch and it ended up knocking into the hands of the Green Bay receiver twice.
Right, yeah, it's perfect.
2 times, twice.
Yeah, so you know, it's very, yeah, it's extremely Lions because I feel like, you know, the Browns, it's like, oh, man. And, you know, I despite Baker's play this year, I'm kind of optimistic about his trajectory. And obviously the Bills defense is playing, you know, out of its mind. So it's not like, you know, they're currently on that trajectory, but it just feels like over the past 2 decades, you know, they've just been like, have been blown up and beaten up and all that. And like low key, the Dolphins too, although people never put them in that kind of category. But like the Lions, it feels like despite the fact that they have gone 0-16, it feels like, you know, they just get close all the time. Not in the way that like the Vikings do, right? Because the Vikings get close in like games that matter, right? And like in the playoffs and stuff, and they get blown up, which I would argue is worse. But I mean, like, you know, the Lions almost beat the Vikings in that 0-16 season. You know, if it wasn't for like Dan Orlovsky like running out the back of the end zone or something, right? So it just feels like they get close. And this is just like another one of those things where it's just like, come on. And, you know, Matt Stafford's doing a pretty decent job, like establishing himself once again as like a quarterback to watch out for. You know, I thought he had a great game and, you know, it doesn't matter.
No, not in the least. Once again, he's stuck in a situation of being the 3rd best quarterback in his division.
Like, right, yeah, right. It's like what? It's got to be so obnoxious. But yeah, I mean, okay. So final thoughts. So like, I think people are getting pretty sick of, and I agree with them, right? Getting sick of the, you know, play well enough so that the officials can't, you know, change the outcome. You just got to play well enough so the officials don't matter, right? It's like the common thing people say when like a last minute officiating changes something. And then like, you know, when people say that most of the time, you're like kind of sympathetic if it's like this 3-point game that was close the whole time. And, you know, maybe you should, but I just feel like that's just such an unreasonable ask. I mean, the NFL is not college football, right? Like, you know, if Appalachian State blows out Michigan or whatever, or it's a close game and Michigan, you know, loses because of a bad call by a ref or something. And, you know, you could basically say, yeah, you got to play so that ref doesn't make that decision. Tying Appalachian State's, you know, losing to Appalachian State, right? But, you know, it's the NFL. It's a league designed for parity. It's a league where an 0-16 team almost beats a playoff team, right? So you can't demand that, you know, the officials be given that teams be held to such a high standard that they blow out another team by over 2 scores in order to make sure that the officiating doesn't matter. That's an insane ask. And I mean, like what Floria tweeted out that the Lions had to settle for field goals in the red zone. And I get it. That's like a criticism of their performance, but also they got into the red zone like 5 times. Like that's not easy. No. Getting to the red zone is tough. They got rewarded for it with points. So like, I mean, screw off. Like, you should not. The discussion should not be that the Lions settled for field goals. The discussion should entirely be that, like, Trey Flowers got robbed. twice.
Twice.
And then the Lions subsequently got robbed. Like, that's insane.
Well, they got robbed, yes, but I'm still convinced that if Stafford got the ball back, he wouldn't have been able to do anything at that point because we've seen this story so many times.
But that's fate, right? Like, so, but at least let them get the ball back so they get called for a safety in the end zone or something, right? Mm-hmm. Like, let that happen so that it's their fault, right?
I enjoyed the series of texts from my buddy in Detroit who was losing his mind over the end of the game. There's so many expletives here. It was fantastic. And my favorite exchange was the why I don't even let him in. What are you doing? Now, is it just me? And perhaps I just haven't watched a lot of Lions games this year. But comparatively speaking, the way that the Lions tackle seems very specific to Detroit. Like, this isn't a tackle in the sense of like regular, like it's a football tackle or whatever. This seems like all of the tackles tonight from Detroit seemed like bar fights. And I noticed it on a couple of plays in the third quarter, and I went, okay, fine. And then in the fourth quarter, it really ramped up. It's like, I don't know if this is some aggression thing or something that Patricia is like trying to teach them, but it really looks like a bar fight out there.
Yeah, it's nuts. So here's the thing. So the Lions, I think, despite being last in the division, have a really good argument for being the best team in the division because that secondary is so good, but also everyone's just going to fight you. Like,
apparently literally.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's going to be an interesting game coming up. Obviously, we're going to have like a whole preview episode and all that. Or maybe not. There's a lot of life stuff in the way. But
we'll
for both of us.
Yeah, we'll figure things out. But yeah, that was an interesting game, interesting way to end. And welcome to this episode of Norse Code. The Vikings defeated the Turkeys of the East, the Philadelphia Eagles. Also, they were trash. So we get to talk all about Wentz and the not all the drops necessarily, because there weren't a lot of drops, but there was a lot of interesting coaching decisions that led to this victory over Philadelphia. So we get to talk about that. We'll also be going over the mailbag as well, but just wanted to thank you guys so much for listening, for sending in your emails, for sending in your tweets, and of course for donating to the show and help keeping this ad free and help keeping the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Once again, a reminder that if you go to patreon.com/NorseCode and start as a new donor at 350 pennies a month. Let's do $3.50 or $3.50. It is 350 pennies, but still. Sorry, there's a Letterkenny episode involving pennies, and so apparently I have pennies on the brain now. $3.50 will help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay and get you free swag from Norse Code. So if you are interested in such a thing, you can sign up. I have emailed the first batch of people to get addresses. So if you were among the first group, you should check your email and confirm the address with me so I know where I'm going to send it. I will be sending it next week. I will not be doing it this week. There is just too much going on. I will lose my mind and send it to Siberia. So, but Tree helps keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay and helps get free swag to you. So if you're interested, go ahead and do that. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode and donate there. But we do have a couple new donors to mention here. We have Tobin via Patreon. Thank you, Tobin. We have Chris Roberts. Again, thank you. Matthew via Patreon. Again, thank you. And someone who just had a username instead of their actual name, I assume anyway. Otherwise, this is the greatest name in the history of names. Coraxery, I think is how that's pronounced. I want that to be someone's first name in like some adult dystopia novel. Yeah,
that's definitely a dystopia novel name.
Like,
love it.
He knows the secret of the government and he has to like solve it, but it turns out I have to assume he's some clone of some important government person, and like he lost his son, or he's got Coraxery is the one who's going to bring this whole system down. It's going to be great. So thank you, Coraxery, for allowing me to go off on a tangent here. Also, just a quick mention that if you are currently a person on the Norse Code Patreon and you are below 350 and you up it to 350, your pledges do count towards swag. So if you do update that will work. All these things help keep us ad free, helps it so that we're able to do such things like the live show that we'll be doing on November 29th from Petoskey's in Seattle. Again, if you find yourself in the Seattle area for the Seahawks Vikings Monday night game, go ahead and head out to Petoskey's on November 29th. We'll be doing a special live edition of Norse Code. So, all of the shilling aside, we can talk about the win over the Eagles. And The first thing that we should probably talk about is the fact that Diggs just demolished the secondary of the Eagles. Like, it wasn't even close. The bombs that went to him were. I think one of the times the defender was at least 10 to 15 yards behind him during the actual like throwing of the ball. It was insane. Cousins and Diggs hooked up from the very first pass and then proceeded to hook up on 3 touchdowns and really kind of rewrite the narrative of this season.
Yeah, no, it's like I think when, the season is over and we have like a discussion about all the drama regarding like Diggs and whatever, this game occurring the way it did is going to be such a big part of changing the trajectory of that drama, whether it finally ends up being good or bad or whatever for the Vikings. I think that this game is going to feature really prominently in a big way, in almost the same way that the Bears game does. Really phenomenal game from Diggs. Pretty good game from Cousins too, who had a bunch of accurate throws that were like big parts of making sure that Diggs got. He ended up with 185 yards from scrimmage, I think, with 176 or something in the air and the rest on the ground. Or 167 in the air and the rest on the ground. So. Yeah, what's interesting is that it was like a combination of a lot of things. So Diggs obviously is a really high-level route runner, and I'm like happy to say that it's not, just the fact that I focus on the Minnesota Vikings that, makes me think that it's very difficult to find, a much better route runner in the NFL. I mean, you take a look at some of the people who specialize in taking a look at receivers, across NFL Twitter. Brad Kelly, who specializes in receivers, Matt Harmon, who specializes in receivers. They both do national work. Brad Kelly, is a Patriots guy. Matt Harmon is, I think previously he was a Carolina guy, but, he picks a new team every season. They both think Diggs is the top route runner in the NFL, right? And so obviously that played a big role. But, in addition to that, I mean, I think what doesn't get talked about a lot is Diggs's physical capabilities. We kind of think of him the same way we think of like a Julian Edelman or an Antonio Brown or to some extent like Keenan Allen, these kind of mid-size route runners that win intermediate to short, that have, yards after the catch opportunities, like Golden Tate, but aren't really burners down the field. You don't see them as like deep threats. And Diggs is truly a 3-level threat. He really does have the ability to win deep, intermediate, or short. And we saw a bunch of short passes from today. 4 of his targets, 4 of his 11 targets were short. Below like 8 yards. And then 5 of his targets were above 20 yards. 4 of those 5 were above 40 yards. So we saw him win everywhere. He converted a couple of first downs on intermediate targets. He got a touchdown on one of those intermediate targets. And so, yeah, I mean, he really kind of demonstrated everything he could do. But another part of this is also that the Eagles defense just really screwed a bunch of stuff up.
It wasn't pretty. There were a few decisions out there like, what the hell are you doing? Like, isn't this supposed to be the vault? I know that it was covered by Michael Kist about how this defense is supposed to be able to stop the run and stop the run well, and the Vikings were just able to run all over them.
Yeah, it was really weird. It's. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they were pretty conscious of the fact that it was difficult to run inside, and so they were much more comfortable trying to create runs to the outside. They did it a couple of ways too, right? Because they had the end around to Adam Thielen, they had a reverse to Diggs, they had Diggs, kind of throw the ball that turned into a scramble. I guess I'm not going to count that as like run defense. But the Eagles' run defense just like wasn't there. I think a lot of it is because those linebackers that are really good at stopping the run, your Nigel Bradhams and so on, they don't have kind of the same sideline to sideline speed, and so it's kind of difficult for them to kind of meet on the edge when the Vikings were able to get to the edge. And some of it obviously has to do with Dalvin Cook, having a lot of talent, that offensive line blocking better than it's blocked in a long time. But Dalvin Cook kind of spinning out of a tackle to then bounce it outside on an inside run. That was pretty big too. The Eagles got theirs. They had a couple of tackles for losses. They do in every game. But yeah, just a really complete game. I think from the offensive line, they had great pass protection. Kirk was under pressure. I want to say like 30% of dropbacks, which is really good for them, and above average for the rest of the league. and obviously as run blockers, they're able to create some lanes. A lot of it again on the outside, but they did a really good job making sure that people like Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham couldn't blow it up.
What was interesting to me was that the way that the offense for the Vikings was taking part in all this, it's almost like I didn't recognize it. Like the way that they had drawn up passes seemed different. The way that they were consistently going to the outside for runs. I mean, they've thrown pitches before, or counters before, but this seemed just excessive at this point. Like the way that they were utilizing Thielen and Diggs as well, in one case attempting to use Diggs as a quarterback, but the way that they were using them just it seemed different than before. They've used them for end arounds, but this was something else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I don't even want to call them necessarily trick plays, although that's kind of what they are. But I think the use of all of these constraint plays, where you build off of like the natural reaction to your offense. Yeah, a lot heavier in this game. I mean, there was a trick play, right? The Diggs attempted throw that turned into a scramble. And then, they had the end around to Thielen, they had the reverse to Diggs on the other side. They had just a bunch of plays that seemed a lot more kind of exotic, right? Like when you think of like an offensive coordinator getting too cute, you think of those plays. But obviously, in this case, they worked. And so, I mean, we asked Zimmer about this after the game, and he was like, it's just, our game plan. They're, a pretty good defense when it comes to like defending these traditional plays. But when you get and now I'm kind of editorializing, but when you get really good at defending a lot of these traditional plays, you kind of lock yourselves into paths that make it more difficult to defend non-traditional plays. And the Vikings picked up on it and executed really, really well in response to that. But yeah, I agree. It didn't look like the Vikings offense in a lot of ways, just because they did all this stuff that they don't do. They don't feature in the offense. Like you said, they have motions, they have sweeps, they've done end arounds before with Thielen, with Diggs, but it seemed like it was kind of more of a feature of the offense in this game than in other games. And it's kind of cool that the Vikings kind of have the capability to be multidimensional in offense when they need to be, because a big question about this team is whether or not the offense can be multidimensional at all, or whether or not it relies on Dalvin Cook having a good game. So yeah, it definitely did seem like a different offense. I think in a couple of ways too, because I think, obviously Cousins played really well and he was really aggressive.
So on Michael Kist's show, your mortal enemy, Michael Kist said that the Eagles failed the Kirk Cousins litmus test, which is that Kirk Cousins beats up on terrible defenses, which therefore means that the Eagles have a terrible defense. Do you believe that was actually the case, or do you think that this was a case of the Eagles are actually decent and Kirk Cousins just balled out?
Yeah, so in that show and in my Eagles preview, I bring up the fact that the Eagles in the first 4 games of the season, they end up 22nd in DVOA, they end up 27th in adjusted net yards per attempt. And then because they played the Jets, and they played the Jets really well. They played the Jets better than I think any other defense did. So, kudos to them. But, because they played the Jets, got 10 sacks on 36 dropbacks, I want to say, 37. Their adjusted net yards per attempt moves from like 27th to 13th, or DVOA moves from 22nd to 6th, and DVOA takes into account the defensive scores that they got, right? The expected points jump up dramatically because of those defensive scores. And defensive scores are unreliable, as I think any Vikings fan who's been familiar with this team for the past 4 years kind of recognizes. And if one game kind of swings things so harshly statistically in one direction, then it is likely that one game is more noise than signal. And so I am not 100% convinced that the Vikings can perform against good defenses yet. But the good news is that it looks like they won't have to for the next couple of weeks. In fact, the best defenses that they'll play are in week 16 and 17. And so they can kind of figure out what that's going to look like for the rest of the year. So, almost who cares, right? Because, those good defenses aren't on the schedule. And so whether or not they can execute against good defenses, we can put that question on the back burner for a while and not have to worry about it. Because, the more we ask this question, the more it's kind of like a backhanded compliment to Cousins, right? And there's not really a reason to do that if he keeps executing week after week. And, he finally executed 2 weeks in a row against a much better defense than the Giants defense or the Raiders defense or the Atlanta defense. So even if the Eagles defense is not kind of what it's made out to be, it's certainly, I think, in a class that, despite being 27th in adjusted net yards per attempt, which was, I think, one above the Giants before entering the Jets game, I think qualitatively we can say it's a better defense, just like kind of on film. So I would put him like a tier above that group, and that's good to see that he has the ability to kind of put pressure on those kinds of defenses. So yeah, I don't think that Eagles defense was as the averages would have indicated. I think that Michael, I don't like the sentence that Michael Kist was right. That this might be, we will fight to the death one day.
I just don't want him to clip that and have it be able to be used on his show. Like, no one should ever clip that and send it to his Twitter account at all. Don't do this. This is bad. Breaking news from the Detroit Free Press Twitter account. The final, Packers 23, Lions 22. Lions blow a 13-point lead, settle for 5 field goals, and have multiple blown calls go against them. But on the bright side, in 5 billion years, the sun will swell into a red giant, vaporize the earth, and obliterate all evidence of this game happening.
I love that tweet. Also, it's not technically true because there will be radio waves sent out and it will reverberate throughout the galaxy. So good luck.
Hopefully they were able to switch, anyone receiving the signal was able to get the HD antenna, otherwise they're just not going to be able to get it. So hopefully the news went out about that and the aliens were able to figure out and adapt. So anyway, back to the Eagles game for just a moment. And after we've discussed about the eventual heat death of the universe, or at least this solar system. So Dalvin Cook had a good game, but Madison rather. I've been watching too much of Matty Matheson, admittedly, so I keep calling Madison. But Madison had a great game. Madison was quite useful.
Yeah, he's in theory more efficient, right, than Dalvin Cook. Yeah, no, the thing that's kind of surprising is, he gets billed as, and, by people like me, I don't want to use the passive voice to deflect the fact that I also had this opinion, but he gets billed as this guy that is not, going to break out a huge run. He's not going to, house it when he sees open field. He's going to get caught from behind, which, I guess that did happen. And he seems like a goal line back, he doesn't seem like a back that's just going to take over and be a primary back if Dalvin Cook goes down or take over for an entire series. And, from game one, we've seen that that's not the case. We see that, obviously he does play with a lot of power, right? That part of the game is always there for him. But he can play for an entire series and be just kind of a feature back. And, maybe he's not going to give you 25 yards, but no one's going to complain about getting 12, right? And so on those big plays, he's still kind of producing. And in this game, I think we saw a lot of it. And then we also saw other kinds of athleticism. That hurdle was so smooth.
It was
in stride.
And it didn't seem like a hurdle that he would regret immediately afterwards.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he immediately puts his feet on the ground.
Yep.
It's so many NFL hurdles are inefficient, and not just because you only get 2 or 3 more yards, although also because of that, but because you're spending so much energy going vertical, you don't have that much energy going horizontal. And he looked like he was running track, man. He was just whoop, right over it.
Exactly.
So, really good to see. Obviously, he doesn't have the home run potential of Cook, but also Cook is a bell cow back that fell to the second round. Madison is, in theory, kind of a relief back that maybe got overdrafted into the third round. And so when you kind of compare with the expectations, Madison is blowing his expectations out of the water. Cook kind of is too, honestly. But it is really cool to see, Madison have a good game, especially because, people like me and a lot of people were not super enthused about the pick. I still don't think that that's great pick for value, but that doesn't degrade from Madison's overall game. I thought, just generally speaking this year and in that game, he did really well. Indeed,
it was really awesome to watch. But let's not downplay the reception touchdowns of Thielen. Thielen was all over the place too. This was a really great day to be a wide receiver for the Vikings. Not to mention Laquan Treadwell coming in the clutch with a fantastic grab, and clearly, like, this was his moment. This might be his career highlight at this point.
I mean, it kind of is, right?
He has a touchdown, but I think this catch was bigger.
So the problem is that touchdown occurs in a game where he also nearly lost it for the Vikings. Mm-hmm. So it's like that game is like bittersweet, right? Because like he scores a touchdown, and at the end, the ball clatters off his hand for an interception, and the Vikings somehow, they get the ball back. They, score the tying, whatever downfield to Adam Thielen. Yeah. But like he got bailed out of that game, and so it's really difficult to say that game contains that highlight. This one, toe tap on the sideline, man.
Gorgeous.
Extend the drive.
All of his potential spent in like one move. Like, oh my, and I cackled. I cackled hard at the TV when I saw who made the catch. I was like, is that number 11? Is that Trent? Oh my God, it was. You're kidding me. Of all people on the team, it wasn't CJ Ham. It was Laquan Treadwell.
There was at least one person in the press box that was like, I thought Davion Davis was waived. Like, they didn't.
Aw.
Who is that? Like, well, I mean, it didn't even cross our minds that Treadwell would be playing snaps. Good for him for like proving our like unconscious assumption wrong. But like, what?
Yeah, all of a sudden it has to feel super rewarding for him. Not just the whole like coming back and like coming back being re-signed, whatever, because the Vikings needed him, because he had familiarity with the offense and everything, but that he was able to like pull off. It was a fourth down play or was it a third down play? I can't remember which. When he pulled it in, just toe tapped it in, like that has to feel good for him.
Oh yeah, well, especially because he got cut, right? Like, yep. So the thing about Treadwell is that for a long time he didn't seem to demonstrate an understanding that his position on the team was precarious, right? Which is not to say he was arrogant, but he through his words to the media, and actually it just felt like he didn't really understand that he was underperforming so much that the team was really concerned, right? Like the demotion and playing time didn't seem to register as hey, you might not be on the team next year, sort of thing. And so when he actually got cut, and that must have been, and I say this because I feel kind of empathy, that must have felt like shocking, and that must have felt awful. So for him to re-sign with the team after no one picks him up, which that itself must have just been awful, and then make a contribution, that must have just felt amazing. That one catch probably feels better than any of Diggs' touchdowns felt to Diggs, and I know Diggs has been frustrated the whole season, right? So that must have been just an incredible accomplishment for him.
No kidding. And and Thielen had a game, and Olabisi Johnson had a game. Rudolph even was able to contribute, although that was a bit of an odd. It wasn't an odd move that he had made near the end zone, but it almost looked like even Rudolph was going to be able to score. Like, this was an offense that was firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, and there were two more touchdowns that they could have scored that they didn't, just because they weren't pitch perfect on every throw, right? There was the Thielen throw, which maybe 80% Kirk, 20% Thielen, where Thielen doesn't get that second foot in before the knee falls, but Kirk throws him out of bounds. There's the Diggs overthrow, which a lot of people have been telling me, which is, they're not absolving Kirk when they say this for the most part. So I'm not saying hey, which you don't need to absolve him. He had a really good game. But they're saying, hey, does it feel like Diggs kind of let up on that throw? And I don't think so. I think it might look like it because he's not pumping his arms, but honestly, I don't think he let up at all. I don't think he had any opportunity to get that ball. But I think that the visual angle that we got from the broadcast, plus kind of his body language, made it seem like he gave up on a catchable ball. But from my angle, in the press box, and I wouldn't be surprised if the all-22 looked like this too, it didn't look like it was remotely catchable. But yeah, okay, so a couple of touchdowns that could have been there that weren't there, and we're talking about a 6-touchdown day, and it's just what a great day for Cousins, for the offense, for Diggs. Thielen had a really good day, phenomenal.
This is one to hold your to hang your hat on. Like, this was great. This may likely be the one thing that turns us from on the road from 8-8 to the road to 9-7. So I'm totally fine with how this one played out. This was awesome. I enjoyed this thoroughly. The defense also was playing for a while out of their minds. Like, this was a defense that didn't give up anything in the way of the run for a good portion of time, and then Wentz was able to improvise a bit and get a couple of passes in. Before we start, you're somebody who has spent a lot of time analyzing Wentz, and there's the understatement of the show. I was doing this thing where I had the game on my TV tonight, and then I was rewatching. I was grinding film on my phone due to my dedication. Patreon.com/Norse Code, everybody. So I'm grinding film on my phone of the Vikings Eagles game, and I was watching the comparison between the way Wentz was throwing the ball and the way that Aaron Rodgers throws the ball. And not that I think that Aaron Rodgers is like some gold standard for how to throw the ball, but Wentz throws the ball in a very odd way, doesn't he?
Well, yeah, but I think also part of it is like he changes how he throws the ball, right? Like
his sidearm is just ugly. It's effective, but my God, is it ugly?
Right, and like the shovel that he threw for the touchdown.
Yep.
Just like, which, I mean, shovel passes never look good, but like, some quarterbacks can kind of make them look a little bit better. Like, Teddy and Favre, their shovel passes look a little bit, which, like, if we're talking about Favre in terms of good looking throws, weird. But but Wentz is just like, it's just out there. Obviously seems to work sometimes. But yeah, no, it's interesting. But I think the thing that I think really gets people for the comparison is how Wentz buys time in the pocket and just avoids sacks. I mean, that was so frustrating watching, all those defenders in the backfield and nothing happening until like the fourth quarter.
Everson getting spun out. Like, of all people, Everson Griffin got spun out on a sack after, and you watch the replay of that play and you see how he decimated that offensive lineman. Just beat him he basically punched him in the face and got past him. And then he ended up getting shook off by Carson Wentz in a spin move.
Just wild. I mean, Everson had a really good day against first Jason Peters and then Andre Dillard. Well, crushed Andre Dillard as soon as that replacement was made. But couldn't turn it into a sack, which, I mean, that's like he'll get his, probably next week, given the Vikings' record of sacking Stafford. But it would have been nice to add to the sack total. But yeah, great game from Everson. Really good game from Daniel Hunter, who ended up, breaking the record for the most sacks before turning 25, which. It's a record I found and published, and then other people are not attributing me for it.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a matter of public record, so whatever. But
it's a stat. It's a stat that you cared about, and then brought it to the public. Can't you just enjoy the fact that other people are reporting this thing that you brought to the? Isn't that the whole point of journalism? Is to spread the information about this, and not necessarily about getting the credit?
I have made it very clear that I am a fan of my takes, first and foremost.
And your brand.
And my brand. I mean, honestly, that question should be, shouldn't you just be glad for Daniil Hunter for, maybe in your fairy tale world where people care about stuff.
But in this world where clicks count and subscriptions to premium services count, I want credit for this. Somebody do a breakdown of this on The Ringer and give me credit again. He had a phenomenal game. One thing about Everson Griffin, real quick, my God, he wanted that touchdown. Like, when he got the ball in his hands, he was looking every which way to get that to be a touchdown. He didn't just drop to his knees and be like, okay, I'm going to get the down, or I'm going to go down here and the Vikings are just going to kneel this. He wanted that score badly. He wanted to become a GIF, or rather, he wanted to become a meme just like Lindvall.
And like he's cutting across the field.
Of
And there's
all
like
people, Everson Griffin doing this.
Yeah, and there's like a second where I'm like, wait, is he gonna do this? And then he like runs into a tackle.
Yeah.
But, before that, it was really incredible.
I can't decide if that was my favorite play of the game, or if it was one of the two Diggs bombs. But when Everson Griffin was trying like hell to find a way to the end zone, and he's like 60 to 80 yards away, he just wanted it so badly, and as a result, you wanted it for him.
Right, and like the rational part of your brain is like, just you might fumble this. Just like go to the ground. It doesn't matter. We'll kneel it out. And like the emotional part of your game, the one that's watching football, is just like go.
For a while, I was trying to figure out if it was 97 or if it was Everson Griffin there, or if it was Linval. Either way, there was a potential of a big guy touchdown, and big guy touchdowns are always awesome. So the thought.
Well, yeah, Linval got his against the Eagles, right? So, it would have only been appropriate for Everson to get the run back.
Mm-hmm. Maybe next time. But that was awesome. This was and we were able to pressure Wentz, but Wentz was able to get to the outside and make a lot of connections to Alshon Jeffrey and Ertz as well. Let's talk corners, because this was the best of times and worst of times for Trey Waynes.
Yeah, so he got targeted, 11 times? He got targeted more than anyone else. Kendricks, technically, he got targeted 9 times, but that's just kind of linebacker life, where sometimes you end up with a bunch of targets because they happen in short zones. But yeah, he got targeted 11 times, and on some of these targets, I think he played really well. I was really happy he wasn't called for defensive pass interference on that deep one to Jeffrey, because I think in a rational world where the NFL in a rational world the NFL wouldn't exist. Which maybe that's a take for another time, but I'm glad it does, because I'm also irrational. But in a world where the NFL is officiated mostly correctly, that never gets called for defensive pass interference. So I'm glad for football that wasn't, but I'm also glad, Trey Waynes, I thought he just made a good play and he deserved to get rewarded for it, and he did. So that was really good. We saw him, blow some coverages. He gave up, I think 69 yards. Nice. Overall, in yardage. So, that's not a fantastic game, but I think given the number of targets he saw, so there's a couple of things at play. Like, I know, for example, I think Sam Ekstrom's take is, hey, given the number of targets he saw, only giving up 70 odd yards is really good. Which, I see where that's coming from, but also the part of the reason that you see 11 targets, I don't think Wentz was necessarily picking on him. Like, I think maybe the offensive play calling was designed a little bit to attack Waynes. But I think for the most part, I think Wentz saw what he thought was open and threw it. And if you're the most targeted cornerback, so right now Waynes is one of the most targeted cornerbacks in the NFL again, which happened, 2 years ago and I think 3 years ago as well. At least on a per coverage snap basis, that's likely because you're letting your guy open. And, there's a difference between someone like Richard Sherman, who would bait quarterbacks into throwing into his coverage by playing off his receiver and then accelerating into the coverage to get the interception, which is a very dangerous style of play. And I think Waynes, who doesn't do that, leaving his receivers to get that half a step. He has really good recovery, so he can kind of make up for it. But if he's getting targeted, he is leaving receivers open. So that, I think, is part of the game. It felt like Xavier Rhodes wasn't targeted very much. He still got 6 targets, which is kind of a lot. He didn't give up a ton of yards. He didn't give up, I think, a gain over 9, I want to say. So relatively speaking, pretty good game for him. Again, not a shutdown game. We kind of want shutdown games from a person with that contract, but pretty good game, all things considered. Maybe had, I want to say, one not so great rep, but for the most part, pretty good stuff. And I'm kind of curious if the All-22 shows, lockdown coverage on some of those other snaps. I don't know. But like you said, up and down for Trey Waynes. I think most people are counting this as a win for Waynes. I'm going to say it's on the side of a win, but I think that you're right that it's more mixed than anything.
Yeah, and there was a good touchdown that he broke up as well. So like a lot of this defense wasn't just in the middle of the field; it was at important times of the game. Boy, Eric Kendricks is balling out of his mind right now. It is just nuts to watch. We are watching. I happen to think that we are watching at least peak Eric Kendricks, possibly peak Anthony Barr, peak Harrison Smith, like, and Daniil Hunter. Like this may be the peak of this version of the defense right now.
Well, yeah, I think some players are having career years, right? And I think you wanted to also say Daniil Hunter, but like, you know, he's so young, he's probably got a better year somewhere in the future.
Yeah.
But we can say we're watching career years, right? Because you can have another better career year later. So I would say this is definitely Eric Kendricks' best year. I'll say Anthony Barr is still not playing to that level he played at in 2015, his second year in the NFL. He was just incredible that year, but he is playing, I think, his second best, but he's playing better than he did as a rookie. He's playing better than he did ever since 2015. He's playing just really incredibly. And remember, I was a huge defender of his play last year. I thought he played, you know, significantly above average for a linebacker, maybe not at a Pro Bowl level, and he ended up making it to the Pro Bowl, but he played really well. Right now he's playing at, you know, that kind of Pro Bowl level, whatever that means now that the Pro Bowl has been kind of diminished in terms of value. But yeah, Kendricks, you know, Chris Thomason informed Zimmer that Kendricks is the highest or second highest rated linebacker by PFF. There's a really funny video going around about that Adam Patrick shared. To put that in the show notes.
Somebody who does not like PFF at all cheering on PFF.
Yeah, it's so funny. But yeah, Kendricks is having a really astounding year. Griffin's having a bounce back year, which is really great. He's almost playing at that 2017 level. Just wrote a piece about that. Wrote a piece about Kendricks. Wrote a piece about Hunter. All because, I mean, all of these people are having like these really phenomenal years. I'll say, you know, Harrison Smith isn't playing like he did in 2016, 2017. He's playing at a really high level. He's playing better than the vast majority of safeties in the NFL. I don't know what safeties are playing better right now, but, you know, can't be a ton. Anthony Harris might be playing better, honestly. He's having a stunning year. He's really good. He feels like kind of... You remember when Kevin Byard tweeted at, like, who was it, at Deion Sanders or something? Because Deion Sanders, like, listed his, like, top safeties, and Kevin Byard was like, well, you're not going to talk about Kevin Byard, all-pro safety? Yeah, it feels kind of like that where I don't know whether or not he's going to get postseason recognition for his play. I feel like PFF tends to influence the way we view offensive linemen and the way we view safeties a lot. So, you know, if he continues to have high PFF grades, you know, he may end up with some accolades. But I just feel like we're not going to talk about him for like a couple. It's going to take a while for people to recognize how good he has been, and how good he is. But he's having a really stunningly good year. Even if you like take like his 3 turnovers from early in the season away, he's just been playing really incredible assignment sound football. He's deterring throws into his coverage on a really, really consistent basis. He's playing really well against the run. So I would put Anthony Harris in that group of players having a really astounding career year too. So yeah, really, really good stuff. And at the top of that list in terms of people kind of showing out their best moments for their career thus far, I think Eric Kendricks is there. Just wonderful play from him. And we're saying that, and he gave up like a 29-yard touchdown to Miles Sanders, and we're like, yeah, well, you know, he's great.
Be like, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs, apparently. Yeah, that was, and that play itself just seemed oddly drawn up for the defense. It looked like it was either a broken play, or B, one of those situations where they decided to put the exact wrong like position on a receiver.
Well, I mean, Sanders is a running back. That's the thing. He plays like a receiver, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, which is crazy because at Penn State, he actually didn't catch that many passes. I mean, Saquon Barkley's backup took over for Saquon Barkley, did not play the same style of football as Barkley, didn't catch as many passes. So people didn't really expect to see him as a receiving back. But he's actually been one of the better Eagles receivers this year. Yeah, not a high bar, but you know, he's been playing pretty well, catching the ball. And I think it's been a pleasant surprise to a lot of people. a lot of people were, and you're not the only one to say this. A lot of people were like, "Why is Kendricks on a receiver? He's not. That's a running back." And the fact that he got that open is a pretty big credit to him. But yeah, and he ended up toasting Anthony Barr on another one for like 45 yards. So really good stuff from him. But yeah, from Kendricks' perspective, maybe about his only mistake in the game, which costly, I guess, but. When you make one mistake in a game, as a tackle, that's not great. But I think as a linebacker, that's, I think, really phenomenal.
So before we start talking about terrible coaching decisions by the Philadelphia Eagles, I did want to bring up the pass to Mackenzie Alexander, who was not the designed receiver on that play, but clearly the way it worked out. I don't see why anyone would have thrown that pass if you were. It didn't make any sense to me when Wentz dropped that back, and I know you had to just be giggling maniacally or like stifling it inside of the press box.
So, related but unrelated, I tweeted out that like Carson Wentz has had some like pretty amazing throws, and obviously he deserves credit for them. But I'm talking about Carson Wentz, so I have to like pull that back. I have to compliment sandwich it. But he's actually thrown a lot of interceptable passes in this game. One was a Kendricks tip that Rhodes nearly intercepted. Would have been nice for, I think, his, hashtag narrative. Even though like tipped interceptions, it really shouldn't count in terms of the narrative, but fine. There's another tip from. That was another tip that was maybe less interceptable, but nearly turned into an interception for Trey Waynes. And then there's the catch by Mackenzie Alexander, again, the intended receiver. And then like the very next drive or the previous play or something like that, there was a dropped interception from Anthony Barr. Which, by the way, just a really incredibly athletic play from Barr. It would have just been really incredible if he had hauled it in. But yeah, I mean, he threw, and then later he threw another interceptable pass too. So he had like 3 for sure turnover-worthy throws. Fourth, I think the Kendricks tip that Rhodes nearly caught, you could say is arguably turnover-worthy. And then, the other tip, maybe not so much. But yeah, that's kind of the thing when you've got, a gunslinger quarterback is that, he'll make those incredible, like the one he arced over Waynes, I think it was to Jeffrey. I think he was on the move and he was evading a sack, like just a gorgeous throw, just beautiful, right? And that's, you get some of that, or the shovel for the touchdown, just like incredible improvisational play. But he kind of got away with a couple of dropped picks too. So I don't think he played nearly. I think his PFF grade was like very average too. So I don't think he played nearly as well as the numbers would suggest. But yeah. Good to see Mackenzie Alexander. I don't think he got a pick in high school. He didn't get any picks in college. 4 years of college, no picks. And he has like 2 picks in the NFL, and that was one of them. Good to see.
Good to see. He did look like the intended receiver there for a bit. That was.
He did.
It was, and the ball placement and everything. It was perfect. It was drawn up exactly the way it should have been. Now let's talk about a few coaching decisions by the Eagles that were, I want to say, questionable. You get into the red zone, you fake the field goal, and then your kicker throws a pick. Admittedly, it was a tipped pass and ended up turning into a pick. I want to formally announce that next year, if your kicker throws an interception, you automatically lose your game. I think that has to be a rule in the Norse Code League. I'm not putting it to a vote. This is my league, damn it. Every league involving the Norse Code rules, if your kicker throws a pick, you lose the game.
This is like your gradual march towards tyranny.
This is, and I love it. It's so dumb. Why, if you are going to pay, and I realize I'm paraphrasing Michael Kist here, which apologies, but if you are going to pay Carson Wentz this absurd amount of money for a contract, why the hell are you faking the kick? Why don't you just put the guy out there who's actually, you are paying to pass the ball? Like, why are you throwing your kicker out there in a like a long distance situation?
So I'll say that. So I think Michael Kist actually just said that, right? So you are actually channeling him. I'll say this in defense of the Eagles. God, what a sentence.
This is not a good episode for you. For you.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Vikings won, so the takes remain. I saw Fran Duffy, who writes for PhiladelphiaEagles.com. Really incredible stuff. Might be the best. No shade to Lindsay or Craig Peters or Eric Smith, but might be the best team employed writer of any team. He just does incredible breakdowns, and he actually broke down this fake, and he demonstrated over a couple of Vikings field goal reps that the Vikings actually left a fairly significant opening for the final field goal protector on the edge to run a route with no one near him. If the fake gets executed. And the Vikings, when they play safe, show a different front. And so when they want to block the kick, they show an overload front with, one, rusher on the other side playing off so they can recover the blocked kick. And when they play safe, they've got, people standing up as opposed to kind of just down. So the Vikings showed their overload, which is for a block and not safe. And then they played as if they were. So it's actually kind of really cool that the Vikings faked their overload to protect against a fake. And it was just called at the perfect time. So in fairness to the Eagles, this was something they saw on film that would be there. Also, Jake Elliott is a pretty good athlete for a kicker. Maybe you should have just gone for it on fourth down. But, you see an opportunity there, you take it. I don't know.
Is this sort of like the Pat McAfee story about how he was going to score a touchdown, and then Troy Polamalu changed where he was standing, and he went, oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, kind of, except the snap and the play still happened.
Yeah. They decided to continue to go with it.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to mention about the game, and then you can do some odds and ends. I don't remember if this was a stat from the broadcast on TV or if this was Paul Allen saying it on radio, because at one point I was listening kind of between the two. There was this great stat that came out that basically said the less Carson Wentz throws, the more often he wins. And I heard that stat and I immediately thought of you.
Well, I mean, so obviously it's related to all of the running back carry stats, right? It's like, when running backs get 30 carries, they win. Well, it's because teams are running out the clock when they're ahead, and I assume it's the same thing for Carson Wentz. But also, the truth will not stop me from these takes. The evidence is there. Carson Wentz sucks.
Carson Wentz is a trash meat. That's all we got. It's a big old bag of trash meat. Any odds and ends we should cover before we go to the mailbag?
Dan Bailey.
We
look
don't.
At him go.
Yeah, Dan Bailey, who is just drilling them left and right. He was having a fantastic game.
Which I honestly think a lot of this does have to do with better holding. Britton Colquitt was right. The city does deserve a better class of holder.
I feel like that's paraphrasing the line from the Joker in The Dark Knight. This town deserves a better class of criminal. That is Jesus.
But I think holding had a lot to do with it because Zimmer's insisted that Bailey's approach hasn't changed, and he's also insisted that holding has been a big part of the issue. And also they've demonstrated that they care a lot about this by having other people hold that aren't the punter in practices. And then they just sign a guy essentially off the street to hold. I mean, he also punts fairly well. I mean, in this game, he had one bad punt and one really good punt. So, but he punts fairly well. But he's supposed to be a really good holder. And, Dan Bailey is phenomenal this year. So, okay, it's probably that then. So I'll say that. Other odds and ends, BC Johnson, great catch, not catch.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows if it should count, but he has got 100% catch rate for the year. He's playing better than I would have expected BB to if BB was healthy. He's wide receiver 3. Kind of cool that they might actually have an answer there when they previously did not. Also, on the play so what is it, the second Diggs touchdown, the blown coverage, on that play where BC Johnson is also open by like even more than Diggs is by like maybe 3/4 of a mile.
Yeah.
So Diggs is open because Rasul Douglas expects zone coverage on his side, and he expects a safety on top, and he expects to play the flat. And Douglas sees that that's not the case and is racing to catch up. BC is open because the cornerback, and it must have been Sidney Jones, is playing press coverage, jams him, and misses because BC Johnson wins on the release and toasts him. So the corner is supposed to be in coverage on him, whereas, and, very often teams will kind of split, that might have been a cover 6 play, for example. Will very often split who has what on the field, but BC Johnson just won his route, whereas Diggs was kind of a benefactor of a blown coverage. So credit to Johnson there. Really good to see. People want to ask about Garrett Bradbury. Yeah, he had a good game, 2 good games in a row. This might be the beginning of a turnaround. I was suspicious of what that might look like against the Giants because they've got 3 nose tackles. Now we got to see him up against, a backup nose tackle. I think it was Akeem Spence maybe. But still good to see, because if you're previously the worst graded pass protector at your position, a backup is going to eat you alive. So the fact that he did pretty well is really kind of positive and encouraging to see. Dakota Dozier played really well after having some difficulties this year too, so that's good to see. And then, would have been nice if Irv Smith was open and Diggs threw it. That would have been fun.
That would have been fun, but if you analyze that play, Diggs not throwing it turned into like a fantastic thing, because that first one didn't look good. The first opportunity he had, and then the second opportunity he had, that really didn't look good, at all. So the fact that he was actually
turned into like 6 yards instead of like a 10-yard loss.
He might have made more if he hadn't been tripped up. What I love about that bomb where BC Johnson was open as well was the look that Stephon Diggs gave the defender right as he was crossing for the touchdown, just looking like, you couldn't even touch me if you wanted to. Your arms are way too short to box with God here. Like, what the hell were you thinking? I love the indignant look. Just the indignant look on Diggs's face there. It was fantastic. And then the Diggs toe tap touchdown as well was so perfectly executed.
Oh, incredible. Which, I mean, we're not even talking about that one because he only had it from 11 yards out.
Oh,
it was really like a 20-yard touchdown because he's in the back of the end zone. Mm-hmm. But like that was his most difficult one, right? Like the defender, it's Craig James. It's not like he's not like draped over him, but he's in fairly tight coverage. Kirk throws it up instead of, out, right? Which, that's not necessarily a bad decision, but I would say it's not the ideal decision. Touchdown, so, no need to get too nitpicky. But, throws it up, Diggs has to go up and get it, and then he has to get down without getting pushed out. And just incredible, sideline awareness, which, we're talking about Diggs' incredible day. In fairness, 2 drops, one of them was an interception. And I wanted to write this, but I didn't know an elegant way to put this. But this is an example where we overblame receivers for interceptions, which typically never happens. Like, usually when we blame a receiver for an interception, they are incredibly at fault. In this case, it's like, an interception, when we talk about blame, we're like, oh, it's like 80% on the quarterback, 20% on the receiver, or 80% on the receiver, 20% on the quarterback. And in this case, it's like 0% on the quarterback and like 20% on the receiver and like 80% on like fate, like just random luck. Because like drops don't lead to, like, even if it hits him in the face and he should catch that, drops don't lead to interceptions. So I'm always hesitant to say when a drop leads, which I guess I just did it for Laquan Treadwell, but when a drop leads to an interception, that it's like entirely the receiver's fault. Like, it's more, when Diggs is crossing on the zone and he sits and Kirk doesn't expect him to sit and he throws it and Kirk throws that interception, like that's on Diggs because he should have been there. But like, it's like difficult to say that a drop is an interception and therefore is the receiver's fault. Diggs created an opportunity for an interception. Andrew Sandeo made a great play. But so Diggs creates an opportunity for an interception. He has another drop. He should have cut inside on that first end around instead of going outside. He probably would have had, green field for a touchdown, would have housed it. He ends up scoring a touchdown, I think, on that drive anyway, so whatever. But, not a perfect game. I think PFF didn't give him a 90. They gave him like an 85. But, really great game, man.
Well, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from Zen Cupid, who asks, I was wondering if this game is the perfect argument for coverage is greater than pass rush.
This is, a representative game. And I was thinking that during the game, that hey, they've got these pretty great defensive linemen. They've got, a reasonable amount of, pressure creators, throughout, because, when they blitz, they blitz defensive backs that tend to be able to create pressure. And Cousins was only pressured for like 30% of the game. Part of it's because he was able to get rid of the ball early. Reason he's able to get the ball early is because these receivers were open against the coverage. And so this is like, I think, the game you would point to if you're making the case that coverage matters more, because the Eagles have a really good to great defensive line, and they've got these like backup quality cornerbacks, and they got demolished. Like if it was like an average defensive performance, then you would have just been like, yeah, it's kind of incomplete, but they got demolished, right? You had good one and not good the other, and you get crushed. Where, the Patriots are like the opposite, where they've got these incredible coverage players and pretty poor pass rush. And they currently are on this insane historic pace defensively. This is maybe a pretty good example of a game where you can say this is the representative example for the argument that coverage matters more than pass rush.
Next question is from Eli, who asks, who can we goad on Twitter on the Lions to call out Kirk Cousins this week? I suppose we didn't cover this, mainly because it turned out, the player who made the comment didn't end up mattering in the game and got roasted repeatedly. And also he got released shortly after the game.
Sad. I don't want to be like, haha, you got fired from your job you used to live.
Nobody is saying that. It was just,
but it's like, so Zach Brown Band, I can't get over that.
Yeah.
Which I don't even like country music. But
you do like a little bit of chicken fried. So you're kind of stuck there.
He says, Kirk Cousins is the weakness of the offense. He says it like on a Friday, so he doesn't get time to clarify. The Vikings don't have time to respond. So the only way he can respond is on the field. Kirk says it on Monday, right? That I guess I only play well when I've got, that fire, when I've got that edge, when I get ticked off, right? I got to find a way to do that. And, the Eagles respond by giving him that. And then he gets demolished in the game. And then also Kirk Cousins specifically gets, has a pretty spectacular game, especially statistically. And then I don't know if you saw this video, but afterwards in the locker room, of course, the first person I go to is Zach Brown. I'm like, hey, do you want to revise what you said? You want to go back on that?
Do you have any thoughts on Kirk Cousins? Does anyone here have any questions for me about anything other than Kirk Cousins?
So they ask him about his comments, and he says, I want to talk about the game. Then they ask, well, do you think Kirk Cousins proved you wrong in the game? Something like that. And he goes, does anyone have any questions about anything besides Kirk Cousins? How do you think he played?
I recognize I have been roasted. I do not wish to continue the roasting inside of the locker room. If you have any questions about anything else.
Okay, so this is a super tough ask. I don't know if I'd be able to do it, but, the quote-unquote appropriate response is just, I was wrong. That's my bad. He played really well. Instead of just I'm not going to answer questions about this. But again, his ego got destroyed. I don't know if I can react well 10 minutes after it happens in a locker room while I was also exerting myself physically, right? The self-confidence blow must be just enormous. That's the thing, why I tend to avoid trash talk when there's accountability. is
that's
the risk of a.
That's why you do all of yours on Twitter. Like it's fine.
Absolutely no accountability.
No.
I mean, but like also like if Mitch Trubisky like suddenly becomes Dan Marino throwing to the left, like it's not that bad for me. Like my ego doesn't get bruised.
You can just take credit and you just take solace in the fact that your tweets and your comments and your articles probably led him to that point. Like they were the fuel that allowed him to have a Rocky montage.
Right, yeah. So you know, like the takesmanship on Twitter, like Carson Wentz had an MVP season, and I'm not that upset about it, right? And like my take from the draft, like my one take from the draft is that dude is bad at football. That take got like face planted into the dirt and then burned, and then the ashes were eaten, like it was destroyed, right? And yeah, that doesn't like hurt my ego that much. It's like, oh, yeah, I was wrong. I should probably evaluate without bias or whatever it is the take is. But yeah, maybe I should look at things objectively if that's the takeaway here.
That's not why you got into journalism, and you know it.
Right. But like, you know, when you're a football player and you're like, that football player is bad, and I'm going to prove it by playing football against him. And like your world collapses on itself, and then you lose your means to feed your family or whatever.
Yeah.
Jeez, I can't imagine how I would react in that locker room.
Brian Bosworth didn't lose his job after Bo Jackson demolished him personally for a touchdown. Like.
Yeah, like he still got to play for a couple more years after his soul got snatched.
Exactly.
Right?
Speaking of which, God, that 30 for 30.
Great one. Amazing, right? A top 5, 7 30 for 30?
I want to say that's a top 5, top 10. That's so good.
But yeah, so they ask him and he just looks utterly destroyed. And so like I can say, hey, you know, the appropriate response here is to be like, my bad. I got to man up and say that's, you know, I shouldn't have said that. Obviously, I was not just wrong in my evaluation, but wrong in my approach. Yeah, he played great. You know, like it's just easy to address the comments while also focusing on the game in theory from an outside perspective. But like, I can't imagine what must be going through his head. But yeah. A link to that. We have to have empathy for these people because, you know, their jobs are on the line. Anyway, link to the video where he gets emotionally wrecked.
That is why people come to the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I just envision the voiceover from Shawshank Redemption going through his head, and Morgan Freeman just going, as he walked to the locker room, he just had to sit and wonder how the hell Kirk Cousins got the better of him.
Okay, so multiple teams are interested. So he's not really going to like lose his job. But I'm just imagining him sitting on the couch watching Kirk Cousins like implode against the Lions or whatever. Just like, I knew it.
Looking like the end scene in Dodgeball where Ben Stiller is eating like the buckets of chicken or something, and just like way out of shape and just like freaking Chuck Norris. Like,
Right.
Friggin' Kirk Cousins. Eddie asks, between the Saints and the Seahawks, who is more likely to bump the Vikings out of a wild card spot?
Come on. Teddy, obviously.
Probably.
No, I mean, okay, so
Saints are going to win that division. The Saints are going to go.
The actual answer is probably the Seahawks because the best team in the NFC might be the 49ers.
Still seems weird.
It still seems weird. I mean, they're a game behind everyone else because they had an early bye, so it just feels like our takes haven't caught up to them. But, you know, if that's the best team in the NFC and they win the NFC West, you still have to deal with the Rams, who, Jared Goff just imploded, but the Rams are not bad. So it's the Rams and the Seahawks fighting for those wild card spots. And, you know, either one of them have the ability or likelihood of just bumping the Vikings out, whereas the Saints win their division, right? So Because it's not going to be the Buccaneers, obviously. It's not going to be the Falcons.
And Carolina doesn't know what, like, Carolina has a backup quarterback, but they don't know what they have in Cam. And apparently Cam is going to be coming back here either next week or the week after because his foot feels better.
Yeah, so we'll see. So, yeah, but I don't think it's going to be the Saints. It's just, I think this question was asked because of my loyalty to Teddy and my perceived loyalty to the Seahawks.
Perceived loyalty. Sure. Let's go to Mick, who asks, realistically, how many bad defenses do we face between now and week 21? Did this game prove the Eagles are just a bad defense?
Yeah, not many. It's all average defenses until like week 16. It's like, you know, at least evaluated by adjusted net yards per attempt. Like they're all between like 10th and 24th or something like that. So a lot of litmus test games, I guess.
Yes. Kyle Slaby asks, rank Jake Elliott as a passer on a scale of Jerick McKinnon to Josh Freeman.
Jesus. So like Elliott got it in the vicinity, like it's in the zip code, right? So it's, you know, clearly better than either McKinnon or Freeman, both of whom were quarterbacks in college in theory. Yeah, I can't. So Freeman obviously is an amazing quarterback because of the memes. Mm-hmm. McKinnon is obviously a fun quarterback because it's like, well, obviously this is a wildcat. Mm-hmm. Jake Elliott, I bet he throws better than both of them.
Slaby also asks, how sustainable is a passing offense that is not run through CJ Ham?
Completely unsustainable. I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, that does.
Did you see how much the 49ers collapsed when Juszczyk was out?
I did see that. It was ridiculous. Was Dusty's return just the friends we made along the way?
Yeah, I mean, Dusty's return is really what you make of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Eric the Viking asks, would the Vikings air attack work if the line didn't play so well? Yes, the Eagles had a weak secondary, but their front seven had the ability to wreck the passing game, but couldn't.
Well, I mean, so one of the things about the Vikings passing game was that it was effective at all three levels. So, yeah, they wouldn't have had those deep shots available to them if the offensive line doesn't hold up the way it does on some of those plays. But I think people kind of forget, like on a blown coverage, receivers can get pretty deep on a quick drop back, like on a 3-step drop. I mean, I've seen, you know, Cousins on a 1-step drop throw Thielen, you know, a 22-yarder, right? When it goes 22 yards in the air. If the receiver wins the release, you can just throw them deep. They can get downfield in a hurry. So I imagine on that second Diggs touchdown, I didn't look at the timing. The video's up at The Athletic. So I'll take a look again. But I imagine one of those deep shots or two of those deep shots are there despite, you know, if that pass rush appears. But, you know, the Vikings probably just eviscerate the Eagles in the short game the way they started out doing. Diggs was winning like slants and curls and comebacks and all that. Obviously, Thielen's really good in the short game as well. He did great intermediate. That tight window throw Kirk made where, I mean, like whoever the safety, Rodney McLeod, it looked like double coverage on Thielen, but mostly Rodney McLeod bit on a non-existent route. I don't know what he was doing, but ended up being a really crazy tight window throw. Thielen hauls it in on a diving catch. Incredible throw. Maybe Kirk's best throw of the day. That is available the entire game if they have to throw quick in response to that. So, yeah, the deep touchdowns aren't there, but I think they march down the field. Obviously, they don't score the same amount, right? Because, you know, you create more opportunities for error, the more plays you have to string together. And that's kind of the effect of a good pass rush. But, you know, I think the Vikings do end up doing pretty well in that game.
Next question is from James Pope, who asks, Daniil Hunter is a stud. What areas of the game can you continue to work on to make him even better?
Man. Well, so he uses this move called the cross chop that is fairly new in the NFL. A couple of other pass rushers use it. I think notably DeMarcus Lawrence. And it looks wild because it kind of violates all these rules about pass rushing and line play in general, because both your feet are off the ground and you're using it to create gravity on the chop, to move the offensive lineman's hands out of the way. And DeMarcus Lawrence has developed a counter move off of it. And he's the only one I think that has. There's a really good story about John Owning, who's really good at breaking down defensive line play from a technique perspective, that I retweeted, I think in the off season, but I'll put in the show notes, that Hunter can add to his game to make the cross chop a much more viable part of his pass rushing maneuvers. But he is great at, reading pass versus run. He's great at defending the run. He's obviously a really good speed rusher. I suppose he could, as a power rusher, do a better job uncoiling his hips because he has a lot of strength, but he doesn't bull rush as well as he has outside moves, inside moves. So he could be a better bull rusher because, some tackles, Jason or Lane Johnson's a really good example of this. Some tackles can't absorb, bull rushes nearly as well as they can stop finesse moves and speed moves. So developing a more effective bull rush, either generating a little bit more strength or more importantly, or either adding more strength or more importantly, leveraging into more strength could probably help. And then, I like spin moves. They're fun. Add that.
More things involving football should make you smile. I think that's yes. What we should work for in all of this. John Belk asks a kind of a lengthy question, but he says, I was surprised to hear Arif advocate for trading up for a quarterback last episode, since I was under the impression that most trades like that end up being extremely value negative, and that the analytics community is generally strongly against them. I have heard smart and analytically inclined people argue that if you're certain a QB is, quote, your guy, then you should do it anyway because a franchise quarterback is so important. But doesn't that ignore the fact that every team that drafts a quarterback high is certain that he's their guy, and most of them are wrong, i.e. that the fundamental issue is that teams are far too certain when evaluating quarterback prospects and should be looking at it probabilistically instead. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, it's probabilistically.
Probabilistically. That's my new favorite word of the day.
So A, a bunch of really good points. B, I think that the draft a ton of picks and let God sort it out approach is really good, except at quarterback. And it's become a little bit less true because we've seen third and fourth round picks and now like sixth and seventh round picks like Gardner Minshew, but mid round picks like Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson really kind of blossom in ways that, we typically haven't seen in the past. But it is still extraordinarily unlikely for you to be able to find a quarterback. And maybe you could say Trevor Siemian, but he wasn't a starting quality quarterback and would not be, I think, a success from the perspective of the strategy of finding a starter. It is so, the talent pool beyond the first round of quarterback is so dramatically small that, like your upside second round cases are like Colin Kaepernick and Derek Carr. Right, I guess Jimmy Garoppolo actually is maybe the proto example currently in the NFL, unless you want to count Drew Brees, but 32nd pick, right? So, but yeah, it's, and obviously there's always Tom Brady, but like it's so difficult to find that quarterback that the kind of shotgun approach to picks that I think the analytic community generally appreciates and enjoys, I think generally does not work at quarterback. I think that you need to pick a guy in the first round. And so that brings up the second thing is that, everybody thinks that they've found their guy. People are very confident in their quarterback evaluation. And, the nature of the NFL is that they're wrong, right? And so more often than not. Like for every Patrick Mahomes, like there's a Mitch Trubisky, right? So, how do you navigate that? You can't. You have to go into these trusting your ability to evaluate. Like that's the issue.
You kind of have to fail at some point.
Yeah. And you have to be comfortable that your confidence is going to be wrong. Mm-hmm. And you've only got, one shot, two if you're lucky, three if you're Spielman, to draft a quarterback. Because you get fired if you draft the wrong one, and that's just the name of the game. Like you can't, like, what are you doing, right? If you're drafting without having any confidence in your evaluations, because even when you're doing kind of the shotgun approach, you're still evaluating this guy's a 3rd round pick, this guy's a 4th round pick, this guy's a 5th round pick, and valuing your picks in ways commensurate to an auction, right? Where a 3rd round pick is worth so much, and you're basically paying a 3rd round pick to get a player, whereas you wouldn't pay that same amount of money for a player that you'd end up drafting in like the 5th round, right? So you have to trust your evaluations at certain points, and one of those points is when you do end up drafting in the 3rd and 4th round, you need to make sure that your evaluations are worthy of a 3rd or 4th rounder. You're going to be wrong, but you have to do it. And I think when drafting a quarterback, you just have to trust that you've got an evaluation team that is good about these sorts of things and is constantly kind of interrogating these questions about what makes a good quarterback or what doesn't, right? Because a couple of years ago, everybody thought that these air raid, I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people thought that these air raid quarterbacks wouldn't translate. And now you've got Patrick Mahomes, obviously. You've got Baker Mayfield, who was really lights out for the second half of last year, obviously struggling this year. You've got Gardner Minshew, who's having a lot of fun, but also doing pretty well. Jared Goff, whatever your perspective on who he is as a quarterback, he's certainly, playing well. And so, you have to constantly kind of reevaluate how you're looking at these quarterbacks. And so if you've got an honest team that's like open to self-evaluation and critical thinking, maybe you're giving yourself a better shot. But yeah, you just at some point, the talent pool is so thin beyond the 1st round. That's the area where you trade up because the quarterback is so important.
All right, next question is from Kenneth Allen, who asks, why does Diggs fall down so often while catching the ball? Does it have something to do with avoiding hits or having to stretch too much to catch balls?
It seems like it's a this year thing. I mean, obviously he laid out for a couple of passes last year, but that's different. Diggs. So what's interesting is that, Diggs in 2017, I don't think he had any drops, or if he did, he only had one combined 2017, 2018. I think he's like 4th or 5th best in drop rate. The only person I know for a fact was better is DeAndre Hopkins. I think Antonio Brown was better too in terms of drop rate. But he doesn't exist anymore. So DeAndre Hopkins, who now has 2 or 3 drops in the season this year. It's kind of funny. But I think this year, one issue that I don't think accounts for all 3 of his drops, but certainly accounts for at least one of them, I think it was the one on 1st and 30, is that he is too busy kind of looking upfield or trying to figure out what to do with the ball once it's in his hands. He's gotten so comfortable with the understanding that he'd hold on to the ball that he drops the ball. And I think that is also related to him falling down maybe a little bit more often this year on these catches. But, sometimes I think a lot of it is just kind of random. Sometimes you have to catch passes in ways that are contorted and that'll make you fall down. That's happening a little more this year. It'll probably balance itself out.
I'm envisioning a scenario where you go up to his locker and just ask him, hey, Diggs, why are you falling down so often? Like, is it like a cleat thing? Is it you're just trying to avoid contact? Like, what's with not the drops, but the falls? Just weird.
The falls.
Damian Barrett asks, results over the weekend, KC, Dallas, and the Chargers have left the remaining schedule looking a little less daunting, but it has highlighted how crucial division games will be to make the playoffs. How confident are you that we can maintain momentum against the Lions on Sunday?
I don't believe in game-to-game momentum. Analytics types are like, I don't believe in momentum, but we criticize people who use momentum because they don't define it very well. And then we sometimes ourselves don't do a very good job defining it. In-game momentum, I think, is a much more complicated issue that has to do with the fact that you've got 22 or really 45 players with a bunch of different emotional responses to the same game state. That can manifest in something that looks like momentum, but it can also manifest in something that looks like a comeback, which is inherently like negative momentum, right? And so I think the fact that players feel momentum in the middle of games is not fake. I think it's a real, genuine experience. I think it informs their capacity to play and stuff like that. I think that that's something that is real, that is not getting captured in the data because a bunch of other players are reacting emotionally elsewhere. We know that emotions kind of impact play, but game to game momentum relies on that lasting from week to week. And while I do think that like a blown up locker room can crater a team, I don't think, being 4-0 makes you, more likely to win a game than a 2-2 team that is just as qualitatively good. And there's a bunch of evidence that suggests that too. Like a 2-2 team that's coming off of 2 losses is basically about as likely to win that next game against a similar quality opponent. So I'll say that. As for, hey, divisional games are important. They count for more. What are they going to do to kind of, get up to the challenge of playing the Lions? Well, if momentum's real, Lions fans or Lions players are probably really pissed. So that'll help. But I don't think there's anything in terms of kind of emotional management of the team that'll let you maintain your run of play. I think it's just going to be normal week in, week out stuff, game plan, evaluate film, so on and so forth.
Next question is from Cizo, who asks, from a cap perspective, is it likely that we can just keep one of Reef, Lindvall, and Griffin in 2020? Who would you choose out of the group?
Griffin, I think. Lindvall obviously has played really well. He's having another kind of bounce back. See, we didn't even talk about him in that section earlier. He's playing kind of out of his mind, but he's playing really well. But he's just like less important, and I don't want to admit. I think he's more important than most nose tackles. I talked to some people at PFF about this. Nose tackles are typically low impact positions in terms of their ability to create wins based off of PFF testing. And I was like, well, Lindvall seems to be kind of a unique case, and it turns out he is. At least historically for the Vikings, he's added more wins than any nose tackle reasonably should be able to. So I don't want to diminish Lindvall Joseph's particular importance, but on the same team, I think Everson Griffin does a lot more. And so I would say Everson Griffin. It seems like, so the counterpoint to that is it seems like defensive tackles have the ability to kind of maintain their career for a lot longer. And maybe that's my bias from watching Pat and Kevin Williams kind of play late into their careers, but that seems to generally be true. But I still think that the additional value of wins you get from the defensive end position, from Everson Griffin in particular, is just that much better. As for Riley Reef, I mean, he's an average tackle. That's really important. Tackles, I think the research is indicating that tackles are more important than even we thought, even, despite the fact that, people kind of always preach trench play. I think tackles are even more important than we tend to think. But, I think, so first, the Vikings have a really great backup tackle situation where I like Afadio Denabo. I don't really like Stephen Weatherly. So the backup defensive end situation is fine. But I think, and they have a great backup defensive tackle situation. So no worries about losing Lindvall in that capacity. But I think it plays a role in your ability to find that replacement, is that Rashad Hill can step in and do all right. But I just think the Vikings should draft a left tackle if they're not drafting a quarterback. So, and you can get your pass rusher of the future in the 3rd or 4th round, as the Vikings seem to consistently do. So I would say let Reef go, just because Everson, because he's playing so much better than a bunch of other pass rushers, is more valuable than Reef is, because he's playing about average.
It is just nice to have the nose tackle position filled so effectively over the past couple of seasons by Lindvall Joseph. Like, nose tackle play by the Vikings has been questionable at best for years, up until Lindvall came in and from the Giants and just took it over. Like, this is my spot. This is everything runs through me on the run, and I am hungry, and I will feast upon you all. Like, it's just been nice to have Lindvall take in that spot, like not have to worry about it.
Yeah, after watching like Fred Evans and Latroy Guion.
Latroy Guion is the name that was ringing through my head throughout that whole thing. Like, it's been so nice to have someone other than Latroy Guion playing nose tackle and being effective at it. Jimmy asks, I'm suddenly becoming I'm suddenly becoming extremely optimistic about this team's chances to make it into the playoffs, perhaps even make a deep playoff push, and not crush my hopes and dreams. Am I an ignorant nincompoop? Arif?
Yeah, obviously you're a sports fan.
Clearly.
And I'm a nincompoop for making my career about sport. Anyway.
What is journalism anyway?
I would say, I would be cautiously optimistic. Well, first, I don't want to like temper fan reactions, but my reaction is be cautiously optimistic. I don't know. Maybe Kirk is pissed for the rest of the year.
The season of cautiously optimistic.
Right. Yeah. There it is again.
Aw. Don from Ohio asks, can we start a GoFundMe for Zach Brown to be Kirk Cousins' a motivational speaker 24/7?
So if you hired Zach Brown as a coach, you'd obviously be paying him a lot less. But like, what do you think the going rate for him to just yell mean things at Kirk Cousins is?
Well, there's those websites where you can go on and like celebrities will like give personalized messages.
You can get a Cameo. You can just, hopefully he's on Cameo. You can go to that app and just get him to read off he probably wouldn't. He seems like he would just refuse that one.
Does anyone have any Cameo requests that don't involve the word Kirk Cousins?
Turning down money at that point.
Yeah. Don from Ohio also asks, does Arif feel more vindicated by beating me in fantasy football or Wentz losing to the Vikings?
Wentz, I think. The fantasy football, I started a tight end who was out. I was just like kind of lucky that Don's tight end also didn't score any points. And that evened up the battlefield. And so I just ended up, I drafted a better team and that bore out. But that's not vindication. I just drafted a better team. The Wentz thing, I'm fighting odds, right? So that's good.
Yeah. I did enjoy having both in one of the leagues, having New England's defense, having Stephon Diggs, and Samuel from Carolina all on the same lineup. And the person who I was playing, who was undefeated to that point, also missed a kick. So it was also Matt Bryant's. Matt Bryant was their kicker. So I had that moment of, well, everything was conspiring against you this particular week. I will never score 165 points again in fantasy this year. Let's just call it good. Diggs explodes and everything goes well for me all of a sudden. I'm fine with that. That is going to be the end of this particular episode of Norse Code. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So I've got a mailbag coming up on The Athletic that will address different questions, I hope, than the one in this podcast. And then also I've already got a piece that broke down Stephon Diggs' excellent day. I talk about his athleticism, his route running, the defense, and I go into like the video diagrams that people seem to enjoy.
All right. So that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We'll be back later this week with a preview game of the Lions. So be sure to check that out later this week. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that revenge is a dish best served funky as hell. And you'll hear from us later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.